Thank you so much, Julia. So good morning and welcome to the Camden Garden Club's 58th annual Winter Horticulture Lecture Series. I'm Blake Sanborn, co-chair of the Education Committee, along with Allison Matlack, who's done a tremendous amount of work organizing this all. We're delighted to partner once again with Camden's Public Library in bringing you this program. The Camden Garden Club is committed to providing free educational programming to our community and beyond. This year, we're exploring various aspects of landscape design with information useful for everyone, whether you're redesigning an entire property or simply planting a small garden by your side door. Each talk will build on the last, and we hope you'll attend all 5 presentations, but you will gain a lot, even if you can attend just 1 or 2. This session is being recorded and questions will be entertained at the end. For those of you who are on Zoom, feel free to type in questions as they arise into the chat, and we'll be looking at those as well as answering questions from people in the room. For those of you who are interested in the Garden Club, you're welcome to join and become a member. And Lucy, our membership chair, is also here. Lucy, do you mind raising your hand? Thank you so much. So you could find Lucy if you're so interested. As part of our educational outreach, we also provide scholarships to Camden Hills Regional High School graduates pursuing studies in agriculture, horticulture, environmental science, or related fields. If you are able to, we would greatly appreciate any contributions to support our educational efforts online. You can press the donate button on our website. That's camdengardenclub.org. If you're in the room, we have a jar in the back. There's also a jar for the library. So, I encourage you to, donate if you like. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Todd Richardson. Todd is a landscape architect and founder of Richardson Associates in Saco, Maine, where I've had the privilege of working with him for the past 3 years. He's a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects and has taught at the Landscape Institute at the Boston Architectural College and the Landscape Institute at Harvard University, among others. His firm has completed over 450 projects throughout New England, and he's known for creating landscapes that are both beautiful and deeply responsive to their surroundings. The title of Todd's talk today is Under the Surface. Please join me in welcoming Todd Richardson.
Terrific. Good morning, everyone. Blake, thank you for that kind introduction. Want to applaud all of those that are here today, having just put down your snow shovels to get here. And also,
you hear okay?
Yes. Okay. Want to welcome those people that are coming in remotely. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I wanted to begin by talking a little further about the definition of under the surface. You might be wondering, what's this all about? For me, under the surface is suggesting that there's something more than meets the eye. Said a bit differently in the context of this talk and the profession of landscape architecture, what you see of a given project is predicated upon how and why the building blocks under the surface define it. So this talk will be placing an emphasis on these building blocks, bringing light to why something is, not just what it is. So that's what the talk is going to be about. I've selected a handful of projects to show you today, which will daylight some of the key aspects and drivers that lie under the surface. Okay, let's get started and look under the hood. I'll be presenting 6 projects. 5 of the projects will be here in Maine, since we're in Maine, but I also have one, the first one, Castle Hill down in Massachusetts. So these are the projects that I'll be discussing. The projects are intended to be diverse, as is much of the work of the office. One has a historic focus, one is a commemorative garden, one is a private residence, one is a memorial, one is a public park, and one is a retreat. So we'll look at those. So I want to do a quick look at the surface of each of these projects. So these are indicative images of the 6 projects we'll be looking at. And I'm going to hold any comments or thoughts on these Yeah. If you didn't gather, that's the historic project on the left, the memorial. That's a garden, a commemorative garden. That's a city park. That's a private residence. And that's a retreat. So I'm going to give you a lot more behind the scenes, under the hood on these projects to get a better understanding of what you're looking at. Oops. How many people have been to the Crane Estate? It's a property owned and managed by the trustees of the reservation down in Ipswich, Massachusetts. If you haven't been, go. It's a really amazing place. The Crane Estate was a property originally developed by Chicago industrialist Richard Crane Jr., who purchased 3,500 acres in 1910. The Crane family established a team of renowned architects, landscape architects, and artists to transform the property into one of America's great country place estates. Now the trustees of the reservation owns and manages 2,100 acres of the original estate. It is designated as a National Historic Landmark, which was in 1998. The property and grounds were planned and designed by the Olmsted brothers and noted landscape architect Arthur Shercliffe. Work began on the Grand LA. It's an important signature part of it you see here. And then looking up a little closer there. So the Grand LA is this piece in the middle. That work began when in 1915. So this is some time ago. The casino, which is this area right here, where this wall is, and you can see the casino here, is Italian for little house. It included a saltwater swimming pool, bathhouse, guest cabanas, and a ballroom. The project that I was involved with began in 2014, and it was the reconstruction of the back wall, which is this here, as it was built there. And the project was to recreate the wall as accurately as possible to its original design. Full disclosure, this was one of my first larger projects. And honestly, its complexity was a bit overwhelming at the time. And I think you'll see why. I just wanted to show you a few slides of the history of the estate, the Grand LA, and the courtyard. I was fortunate to have access to some rare photographs and resources that the trustees of reservation had in their archives, both of the property and specifically the construction of the back wall of the courtyard, which was the focus of the work we were doing. While the historic images were informative, the means and methods of concrete work had advanced considerably since 1915. So there was a limit to the value of what we saw in the historic drawing. So this is a few drawings of the overall estate. And then this is some more detailed images, and I won't talk about each of them, but I will highlight this one. That is the beginning of the construction of the back wall. And you can see the pool, which was a saltwater pool, that piece in the foreground. And then there's some reinforcing and preparation for the wall construction. It was embellished extensively with Tiffany torchère lights. Cracked ice was the style of paving that was used there, intricate coping and materials throughout the courtyard. This is when we showed up. So you can see it was in disrepair. The aerial photograph shows the pool located in the middle, and then the stairs and the back wall were here. So these images primarily focus on the back wall here. One of the first things that we did was to salvage intact existing elements, balusters, paving. They were numbered, inventoried, created, and stored. So you can see there were only a select number of balusters that were salvaged right here, and you can see the coding numbers there. There's some pavers. Here's some crates of the cracked ice. If you look closely, you can see each one of these were numbered. so that we could map how to put them back as they were in the final design. Drawings, there were lots of drawings. The focus was on rigorous dimensioning and detailing of numerous finishes. One positive aspect of the drawing was the courtyard was bilaterally symmetrical, so that if you drew it on the right side, it applied to the left side. So half the drawing to draw the entire courtyard. But the next few slides, I'm not going to speak to extensively, but they show several stages of the construction. In this photograph, you can see the back of the back wall. The retaining component of it is being erected. And to say that there's a little bit of rebar and a little bit of concrete in this project would be an understatement. We did have the support of an outstanding structural engineer. Drainage behind the wall here was really, really important. And the demolition of the project served to be forensic in nature, in that they were able to understand where some of the failure of the previous wall had happened in order to correct it. And one of those was the drainage on the back side of the wall. Mock-ups were a critical part of the project. There were many. I think I mentioned, and maybe I didn't mention, when we were destructing the wall, taking it down, key areas of the wall that were most intact were identified. And then if you can imagine them surgically being removed from the old wall, 1915, and set aside, those were used as comparative examples when we did the mock-ups to see how well the finishes were relating to them. So, these are mock-ups that were here. If you look closely, you can see some of the old pieces here, back in here. And the mock-up process was super intensive, identifying, again, for instance, the detail of an area like this. It was not only that it was an aggregate surface, which not all surfaces were, but what was the density of the aggregate, what was the color of the aggregate to really replicate what was there. So these mock-ups were super important. Means, methods, and materials for concrete work changed significantly since 1915. I think it was the mid 1800s when concrete started showing up in certain forms of building in this country. Concrete had been around for a while, but more as a common building material, reinforced concrete with Portland cement. Anyway, what you're looking at here is within the wall, there are vaulted ceilings. There's a triple vaulted ceiling that occurs right here. And unlike the previous way it was constructed, the way that it was constructed through the project was through a CNC replication of the roof of the triple arched vaulted space, and then a laser cut the styrofoam to become the form. And then above that, the ceiling, the concrete was poured on top of it. One of the concerns going into the project was the weight of the concrete and the rigidity of the styrofoam in terms of flexing. Would that form flex? And fortunately it didn't. And I was pointed out when it was done by the contractor, was quite proud that the convergence points of the three were off by about 1/2 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. So the premise that the styrofoam would hold came through. So now we're going to start to look at some finished pictures of the project. You can see the styrofoam's gone, and that's what the inside, there was a changing room and storage room within this space right here. So this was adjacent to the pool, which is no longer, but all of the coping and pieces were salvaged and are still in storage. And here's some images just of the different pieces. One thing I want to note, this picture shows it really well. That's old and everything else is new. So that was an example of what we were able to assess the structural integrity of a given piece of it, salvage it, number it, and then reintegrate it into the design. So that's the finished project. The trustees in time will redo the entire courtyard. Flanking the courtyard is a bachelor's accommodations and a ballroom and the pool. And you can see none of the bachelor's and ballroom exist, but the pool would be in front of this right here. And it's just lawned over for now. This next project that I want to share with you is the Charles J. Loring in Portland, Maine. It's up on the Eastern Promenade. And I want to tell you a little bit about Charlie Loring and a little bit of behind the scenes with the project so you know what the particular project or why the particular project is what it is. So Charlie Loring was in the Air Force. He served in two conflicts, World War II and the Korean War. He lived from 1918 to 1952. He flew 55 combat missions, which I don't know if there's anyone in the Air Force here, but that's a fairly significant number. And he was a prisoner of war in a Nazi German camp for 6 months. And one aspect of his life that stands out was his selfless act of dedication. In an attack on a Chinese artillery position during his run, his aircraft was struck by intense and accurate anti-air fire. Rather than aborting the mission, Charles Loring continued his diving run, aiming his disabled aircraft at the position and obliterating it and losing his life in the process. After his death, Loring was awarded the Medal of Honor and made the namesake of the Loring Air Force Base. I don't know if people have heard that, up in Limestone, Maine. So this memorial was to commemorate his life in service, his ties to Portland and his family. He lived in Portland, by the way. He wasn't there a lot, but he did, and his family lived there. And many of them still reside in the greater Portland area. So the primary design intention was to have the memorial educate visitors and provide a unique sense of connection both to Charles Loring and to the site for all visitors, particularly veterans and Loring family members. Designing the memorial involved numerous meetings with members of the AMVETS Post, who was the client. The AMVETS Post right in Portland is, I don't know, a quarter mile from the site, as well as community members, not to mention an extensive research into Charlie Loring's life and his legacy. So this site was actually contemplated by the Olmsted brothers when they did the overall master plan for the city of Portland park system. I don't know if you know, but in Maine, we're privileged to have such a thing. And this is the Eastern Prom right here. It's a little bit cut off right there, but if you look down here, this is where the site is now. This was the Olmsted plan for it. 295 runs right here. And I just want to note, because you're going to see a lot of contrast from what was proposed in this plan, the Olmsted brothers proposed a memorial, but of a very different nature. This was a memorial more akin to a soldier on top of a granite block type memorial that was done quite frequently in city parks, Portland being one of those as well. Of note, in this particular project was a day-long workshop. We were interested in engaging the community in developing what this was and why it was. So we brought people together to share thoughts and stories about Charlie Loring. Family members were invited. Some came from further away to attend. Veterans from throughout Maine, actually, including the AMVETS Post, residents and officials from the city of Portland attended the session. So we got together, I think it was an Old Valley Steakhouse out somewhere west of the city, up towards north and west of the city. Anyway, with consent of those who participated, we recorded the entire day. We had it on video. We had a couple tape recorders that were recording it. So we could review and assess the information that came forward from the discussions and ideally incorporate it with factual information we were gathering from our research. Ultimately, the text was intended to tell a story of Charles Loring, and you'll see that in just a minute. Let's see, these are pretty scant, sketchy site plans. There was a set of construction drawings, but I'm going to take you through a series. So the Jack School, this is the plan view right here. This is a section and a plan view of a really important detail I'll share with you. And then this is a cross section that I'll talk about in a minute as well. So Eastern Prom, if you were to travel it, you come down here, the Jack School is off to the right here. And from this particular location, you can look out over Back Cove. 295 is below you. It's kind of an important place on the Eastern Prom, one of the key anchoring elements of this side, which would be the north side of the Eastern Prom. So the plan calls for an inside component of the project and an outside component of the project. The inside was intended to tie to the outside, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But the inside included the following. So that is a grate. It's about 6 feet across that you can walk on. You'll see that in a minute. These are a bunch of boulders. And if you can see some of these lines here, those are vectors. Those are bronze vectors that radiate out from the middle. And then on the outside, the Eastern Prom, this was in the Olmsted plan. There was a major promenade walkway that came around the perimeter because the views were really extensive. So we kept that component of it. So this is the light well. And so that's the grate. Here's the vectors radiating out. There's a poem around the inner part of the cavity with a grate on it. And the intention here, and you'll see some pictures of it, was that this would be brilliantly illuminated at night, so that in the evening, light would come flooding out of this cavity in the middle of the proposal. And I drove up last night in a snowstorm, and it reminded me that one of the cool aspects of the project is when it's snowing and the light is coming out of this well and the snow is drifting across it, it really becomes something special. So this is the middle light well condition. And then that's the drive, the cul-de-sac, I'll call it. So the core of the memorial is here, the drive comes through, and then there's the perimeter walkway. And on that perimeter walkway, there are these vertical granite posts. They're about 10 feet high. We call them sentinel posts. And I'll show you some of these. So here are the elements. You can see the boulders. One of the things that linking the interior to the exterior is that the vectors with the bronze that come through, the boulders were split and separated to the width of the bronze vector. So it kind of ties things through and also creates a sight line right through. That's one of the perimeter sentinel posts on the outside. So it tries to intentionally compress the outside and the inside. So this particular post says the word integrity. I'll go into that in a minute, but there's a couple others. This is the bronze, I'm sorry, the grate right there. That's about 6 feet across. You can see a detail of it right here, and you can pick up on the poem that wraps around it there. So here's a couple examples of the bronze vectors. And I mentioned earlier that they include things that were mentioned by family members and others and factual information. So here's call numbers in the Army, his call number in the Air Force. Here's some order numbers that we were able to find. Sniper Ridge is where his plane went down. There's his birth date right there. And then some things that were said during the workshop that we wrote down and eventually organized on the vector. So here's an example of the vector with the text gliding right through the boulder that's been separated. The sentinel posts surround it. The text for the sentinel posts came out of a question that we asked at the workshop. After we talked about Charlie Loring for the morning, we came back after lunch and we started with a question. If you could use a singular word to describe Charlie Loring after people had shared their thoughts about him, family members, people wrote down words. We collected the words, we put them up on a bulletin board that was in the room, and we came up with a few key words. And so heart was one of those. This remembering is actually on the inside of the memorial. Spirit, integrity, I'm naming a few of them. I don't know that I have all of them at the tip of my tongue, but each of the sentinel posts has one of those key characteristics. So the workshop was really a unique driver for what you see when you come to the project. So some other examples of the boulders, just for scale, that boulder is 5 feet high. And then in the evening, you can see the light wells illuminated here. All the sentinel posts are illuminated in the perimeter. So when you stand in the middle, it's kind of a warm glow coming from the underground up. And then it relates to the vectors and out towards the sentinel posts. And there's some adjacent flagpoles and commemorative plaques just adjacent to the core of the memorial here. Okay, next I'm going to share a little bit about the under the surface aspects of Ganny's Garden. Ganny's Garden was developed in 2011. It's in Kennebunkport, Maine, and it was a unique project for me. This was a garden to honor First Lady Barbara Bush, who people may be aware that the Bush family has a compound in Kennebunkport. It's called Walker's Point. And they spend or have spent time over the decades through various generations coming to Maine as a respite, like many people do, and spend time with family and friends. So it was interesting. One day, when out of the blue, I received a call asking if I would design this commemorative garden in Kennebunkport, by the way, where I live, for Barbara Bush. So that was a reset for me. I hadn't had a chance to work on a project of this nature, given the background of the client. And so the garden was intended to be a place to celebrate Mrs. Bush's role in the community. It was not a political project. I just want to say that. It was more about her engagement in the community and her friendships and how important the community was to her. So if you can center your thinking about this project, which is what I did, on not the politics, but the intention of place and meaning of place and connection to place with people. So this was a garden about her. So not new, you've probably seen many a photo like this before. But what I wanted to do was talk to you a little bit about some of the things that ultimately became part of this garden. And the way that I started getting involved with the garden is I met with family and friends over at Walker Point and started learning a little bit more. Obviously, without Barbara Bush being there, this was to be a surprise for her, to learn a little bit more about it. And so I learned a number of things about what was important about Kennebunkport, and therefore the things that could be reflected in this garden that would be meaningful to her, but also meaningful to visitors and connect to them when they came. So I'm going to give you some hints. I want you to remember that hat, and I want you to remember those shoes right there. So quickly, the site plan. This is a major access coming out of downtown Kennebunkport. It's on a green, a town green, and there's a monument right here. It's a soldier and sailors monument that existed there. There's a neighbor right here that's a property line. And so you would come off the street, you come through an arbor, and that's where you officially enter into the garden. There's a plaque there. And then it's just a series of walks that connect through. And importantly, they get back to this area right in here. So you have to travel through this garden to get to this particular location. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And there's a back wall here. So the walls kind of enclose the garden a little bit. And there is a sitting boulder right here, which I'll show you in a minute. So the garden would be a place to celebrate her role in the community. And then also the fact that their family, she's the first lady of one president and the mother of another. And the organizers of this effort wanted to be a surprise. So more to follow on that. But this is kind of what was the Secret Service or the people that were involved came up with for the plaque. And I think it's interesting here that if you can read that, I hope you can, but it really talks about her as an independent woman and what she did on her own, in addition to her affiliation with her family, the presidency, and politically. So this is the site. This is the sailors, soldiers and sailors memorial. And this is the abutting neighbor, the property line right there. So you can see the construction taking place down here is where the garden ultimately occurred. And some of the stepping stones into the garden, the infrastructure was being developed. And then I won't go into a lot with this other than to show you this is the arbor that you come in. These are some of the walkways that come through the garden. There's the memorial, the sailor and soldier memorial that I spoke of, some of the walls here. So one of the things that we did in the memorial is she had 17 grandkids, and many of them lived in the Kennebunkport area. In fact, my kids knew a few of them, and she really adored her grandchildren. And when she was in Kennebunkport, that gave her a lot of opportunity to share time with them. So one of the things that we did is we got the initials of all their grandkids here, and we had stones obviously etched into the stone were the initials. And then when the mason built the wall, they integrated those stones into it. So throughout the commemorative garden, her grandkids can run around and find their individual stones there while they're at the garden enjoying it. So it's kind of a fun part of the project. This is that back area here, and this is the contemplative area. This little plaque that says Ganny's Garden back in this corner. And there's a hat, there are the shoes, and that's a book. And so the idea was to animate the space without Barbara Bush being there, obviously, where she would sit, take her hat off, kick her shoes off, and read a book. So in the back, this is Pride and Prejudice. So these were actual artifacts that the family stole from her so that we could work with the foundry to get them cast in bronze and then ultimately integrated into the project. She loves to garden, and so we worked with one of the gardeners over at Walker's Point to learn about those plants. Many were divided secretly from her gardens and brought over and integrated into this particular project. And the property, the green, is actually owned and managed by the Kennebunkport Conservation Land Trust. And they did a really creative thing. They have a plant sale every year, and they use divisions from plants that came from Walker's Point as a selling point or an incentive for people to purchase plants. And they do really well in their plant sale, not just because of that, but overall they do. But she loved gardening, she loved plants. And if there's some gardeners in the room, you're probably making out both some annuals and perennials and bulbs shown here. Here's some images of the dedication, which was a surprise. Believe me, we were in the context at this point, but we did attend and were invited to meet Mrs. Bush and the family at the dedication. But what had happened is she was unaware of it. She had an appointment in Kennebunkport. Secret Service took her there. She was coming back from the appointment. The Secret Service pulled over and said, "You need to go inside that tent." And lo and behold, there was a few people that were waiting there to celebrate it. And what was really impressive is it was mostly family and mostly friends in the community. You'll probably see some other faces that you recognize politically, but it's really quite a surprise and quite an event. So the next project that I'm going to share with you is called Railroad Park in downtown Lewiston. And Lewiston's been in the news a lot for certain reasons, but one reason it was in the news quite a bit several years ago was the successful redevelopment of the Mill District. in the eastern side of the city down towards the river. And this park is in that neck of the woods, and it is centered around an old rail line and railroad station. So that's the station that you see right there. So that park exists right there, and that's the railroad station. This is Auburn, it's the Androscoggin River, and this is Lewiston. You can see the density of mill buildings. This is where a lot of renovations taking place. This is Samard Payne Park. There's a lot of festivals that occur there. Lewiston has a lot of civic events that occur there. Richardson Associates worked on an amphitheater right there. But anyway, this is this little place right here. And on the right is a blow up of that. And so the rail used to come in right here, right into draw people off at that station right there. And the tracks were still there. I call it the bumper. There's probably a technical word for the thing that stops the train from going further than the track. That existed. And I think you'll see in a minute some aspects of the site. So this was the Grand Trunk Railroad Station. It was built in 1874. It was through that station that many of the area's French Canadian immigrants arrived to work in the Lewiston Auburn mills. The building, which is on the National Register of Historic Places, was also known as the Ellis Island of Maine. After rail service stopped, it lay abandoned for decades. In 2010, the Lewiston and Auburn Railroad Company was awarded a Recovery Act grant by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and was able to renovate the station. At the time of the project, there was a restaurant and bar, cafe, that was going to occupy the renovated train station, which they did. And this project is really to reflect the history of this site, to be inspired by that railroad and immigration history, but not to be encumbered by it. And in a similar way that the Loring Memorial did not put a granite block with a statue on it, we were trying to look for ways that really felt like it connected to this history in a unique way. So this is the site before we began. It was a vacant parking lot right here. This is the train station. Here's the old rail lines coming through. There's Samard Payne Park. And if you kept going, you go over to Auburn right there. So one of the challenges was, how do you connect through from the dense mill buildings and the population of people that live and work in them, through this site over to through the park and then over to Auburn. And so looking back up, here's some of the old mill buildings. There's the train station. So the plan called for a few things. Here's the railroad depot right here, the historic railroad station. We wanted to create a space off of here for the restaurant to spill out in a gathering space here. So trying to separate and make distinction between a patron of a restaurant and the public. So we kind of worked on a little space right there, handicap access issues. There's one set of the tracks that existed. Here's the main set of the tracks that existed right here, and the bumper stopper is right there. And one of the things that the plan attempts to do is use a geometry that really foils the linearity of and straightness of the railroad tracks. So all these biomorphic swooping lines of plant beds and walls were intended to be a counterpoint to the tracks themselves. Here's some construction pictures. A quick aside, behind the scenes, one of the things that happened on this project is the survey showed those rail lines being level. Well, guess what? They weren't. So in order to create spaces and paving that drained properly and aligned with the railroad tracks, they had to lift the tracks and reset the tracks to get them to do that. So they were lifted in place, and they're still in the place that they were, but that was a little hiccup along the way. Another challenge was, and this is something that I hate to admit, but it happens, is it's easy to draw something, but when you think about how it's actually fabricated and installed, you got to make sure those two work. So this one had some real interesting challenges. If you look at the extent of these walls, those are arced pieces of granite. So the way to fabricate those and have those all fit together was challenging. There was numerous shop drawings and a lot of work done on that. And then this is the finished landscape. I'll show you a few images of that. Here's the cafe, spills out tables. This is at the end, that bumper as I referred to earlier. And then you can see we've left the tracks intact. So they come right across the pavement and they intersect. So you can't see it, but one of the tracks is coming through there in that picture. The other one is there. Here you can see the track coming from the grass. These part and it continues on through the plant bed. So you see things like that emerging throughout the park. And then here is an aerial photograph, obviously. So the Mill District is over there. This is the new park, and this is the connection across the railroad trestle that we were able to create that as a multi-purpose path coming across. This actually shows the Patrick Dempsey Challenge. Ironically, the aerial photograph on Google had that on the day that it was happening, but this is an example of a significant citywide event that occurs. Again, the Auburn Riverwalk comes across there. You come up to the park there. So, okay, we've got two more to review. This is a project in Stonington, Maine. I'm going to call it Stonington Residence. I want to acknowledge this was done in collaboration with Elliott Architects out of Blue Hill, Maine. The office has the privilege of working with them, well, has on a number of projects over the years and is currently working on a number of projects with them now. And also Adams Landscape Construction was the landscape contractor. Show of hands, how many people have been to Stonington? All right. Has anyone noticed driving around the presence of granite? Almost everywhere, right? So there's piles of granite on the side of the road. Occasionally you can peer into a little pit quarry. There are big quarries, and then there's small little pocket quarries here and there. But it's a rich history of granite quarrying. The quarries not only shaped the landscape, physically what you see, but left dramatic pits as well as piles of discarded granite here and there that you see as a result of harvesting stone. But importantly, that the work that happened over a number of years really influenced the cultural fabric of the community because there were so many people that worked within the quarries. In fact, quarrying is one of the states, this is one of the most states' significant industrial legacies happening there. And this legacy spanned from the late 1900s, late 19th century to the early 20th century. And commercial quarrying really hit its high in about 1870. So this is Stonington in the heyday. And then you can begin to see just the incredible activity associated with harvesting granite that went literally around the world from Stonington. It was pretty impressive. At its peak around 1900 to 1910, the Stonington granite industry employed thousands of people, drawing immigrants from Italy, Finland, Sweden. And the Great Depression and the competition of other cheaper building materials sealed the fate of this labor-intensive trade, shifting Stonington's economy towards other means, one of today's, which is lobstering and fishing. A modest revival came back in 1979 when Granite of America reopened Crotch Island Quarry, which is one of the biggest quarries on an island that you can see off of Stonington. However, it's small extractions for veneers, countertops, and restoration. So before showing you the project, I want to say this one celebrates this rich history. And fortunately, we were able to secure granite for this project from a nearby quarry that was doing very, very limited harvesting and cutting of granite. And we were able to convince somebody that this would be a good project for them to work on. And they did. And it was terrific. And it was just outside of town and very close to the property. Here's a couple images. New granite looks like new granite. Older granite, particularly older granite left out or in nature, begins to have a relationship with the mosses and lichens as well as plants. And I think it's inspiring to see that kind of the presence of the history, which is, granite, how solid can you get, and the ephemeral qualities of things that live, such as plants and water. This was the site for this project, and I just wanted to note a couple things. This knob right here, and if you can imagine, I'm taking this picture on another knob that's just like that. I'm standing on it, and then there's a low area that comes through right through here. Quickly, the site plan. This isn't exactly how it's built, but I wanted to include it to show you something that the architecture, the water's down here. The architecture spanned in this direction, and the site and the granite and the way that we used it became a cross grain to the architecture. So you can see some of these pieces that extend the architecture out into the landscape. This is that quarry I was talking about, the little pocket quarry. All the granite for this project came right over from this corner right here. And the house that we're working on is right over here. So right nearby. You would not know this quarry exists if you drove into Stonington. It's behind a church. And I think the gentleman who manages the church runs the quarry now. But this is that abandoned quarry that we were able to get to develop some of it. So looking at pieces, specifying pieces. And then this is how we began to construct the landscape, inspired by aspects and attributes of the way the quarry operations took place and areas of the quarry that were abandoned. So you can see this is paving. These are wall blocks. This is very much like a piece of the quarry. You'll see a piece of that, photograph of that. Here's some other ways in which we were stitching together pieces of granite to form edges in the landscape. And these are coming away from the architecture. So this image right here, when I pointed out the existing conditions, there was a knob on one side and a knob on the other. So the building spans that, and the landscape slides down and through here. And we created quarry-like conditions inspired by some of the things we saw in the actual quarry. Blocks were used here. This is concrete, so this is from the building. And then we started to layer in other pieces of granite. And we also integrated very closely, this was an existing piece of ledge that we were able to connect by a boardwalk leading away from the house to that level area of ledge where they can enjoy an outdoor fire. Okay, the next project we're going to talk a little bit about, calling a lakeside retreat. And this was an interesting project. And I think the part that's under the hood that I wanted, under the surface, under the hood that I wanted to share with you was the challenge of what this project was and the way to realize it. So it was a family that wanted to have a family retreat in Maine, and they had an incredibly special site. And the goal was, how do you connect people to a place? And if you think about the history of Maine, and albeit some people that seasonally come here, it's a place of respite and a place for people to connect, families to connect, and families not only connect to each other, but to nature and what is so beautiful about Maine. That was the case for this particular project. So what I wanted to tell you a little bit about were the ways in which we thought about and ultimately realize a connection between the site and experiences this family would have on it. Pretty incredible site. It's right in here. This is the residence, I guess. And there's some amazing cliffs. It's back in this corner right here. And this is the site plan. So this is Craig Pond right here. Here's the residence. It kind of has two components to it right here. This is the arrival. And there's several outdoor places that people can be. I'm going to just point out a couple of them that you'll see. One is a hot tub and outdoor shower, which were here. So fire pit gathering here. This is a area right at the shore's edge that people can sit and enjoy the lake. I'll tell you a little bit about that. As well as some outdoor seating areas around the primary building itself. It just takes a minute to get your head into what this is a picture of. So this is before the building was built. So these are the forms that are starting to get placed for the footings. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this one was, from the beginning, there was a premise that those things that were important were going to be protected during construction. And so you can see tree protection. The excavation isn't a 1-on-3 slope that took out half the trees around the building. Here's some important trees. The hot tub exists now right over in here. But we were able to understand the site and protect the qualities of it that were important. So in the end, we ended up with something that really was of the place, inspired by the place, and hopefully connected people to it. So stone is kind of a theme that you might be seeing today, but we brought in some larger stones. We moved some stones that were on site. We work closely with Freshwater Stone up in Orland, which is close to the site. And then also, this was a job with Nate Holyoke and Cold Mountain Builders and Witten Architects and then Winkleman Architects. This project spanned for probably about 10 years overall. But you can see these were stones that were brought in. The straps are still on them. Here's one that's on this crane. One of the things that this illustrates is there was a floor-to-floor change from the entrance down to the lower level. So we decided to retain that condition to look like it had always been there by bringing in these bigger pieces of stone. We didn't use new stone. We found patinaed old pieces of stone for various locations. I think these were for the area around the hot tub. Here's that condition right here that I showed you where we're retaining there. So the upper level entrance is there and you come down a full floor there. But here are some images of just the way we planted it. We renaturalized all the disturbed areas. And then here's another example of a tree that was saved 3 feet from the foundation. So it really felt like it was nested in the environment. Lots of trails, threads through the woods. Here was an example. So if you have a deck, instead of moving the boulder to make sure the deck is square, you leave the boulder and you scribe to the boulder itself. We did lighting where lighting looked like that. It didn't look like a stick that stuck up. I was using an old log. This was an interesting 2 parts of the project. One was there's this huge rock that was undermined over time. And we had some structural engineers look at it. And one of the trails comes around and under this boulder. So your head, that's about 10 feet from there to there. So it comes up right from there. So part of it was finding unique qualities of the site and bringing people to them. That was one way. We also wanted to connect. They also had a couple of these portable tents for guests. And so we selected key locations. This boulder is bigger than that Sweetwater tent right there. And then this was a little drainage that came through here. And we propped this up right adjacent to that so the water runs under the building. Down at the waterfront, access to the water included. Instead of a trail running on the ground, we put a suspension bridge that brought you over to that. This is looking down on that. And then on the site plan, I showed you a place that the family could come and sit. Quick story, this was the tip of this big stone right here that crested above the water level, and you couldn't get to it. So this stone was brought by a snowmobile over the ice and placed above to form a natural bridge so that you could come down, across the bridge, come down the stairs, walk over on this, and enjoy that space right there. I'm going to end with an aspect of the project that I have a lot of pride in, that is this hot tub or outdoor area that included a shower in the hot tub. I'm going to show you the hot tub, but this is the base of a cliff right here. And there were several boulders all around here. The family wanted a hot tub and were standing over by the cliff, and I stood there looking at all these boulders, and I said, well, wouldn't it be interesting if you just plucked one of these boulders from the earth, made a hole, filled it with water, and that's your hot tub. It's not one that you buy at the local hardware store, obviously. So this is the making of that. So we had a minimal excavation here. These are the utility feeds that are coming out, and you can see the progression of the hot tub there. And then this is how it ended up. We placed burlap over this rock and irrigated it throughout construction, because the cutting of stone and the use of concrete would be acidic and detrimental to the preservation of some of what we saw when we arrived. Here's this ledge, and if you imagine taking a boulder out of the earth and filling it with water, that's how that ended. So I hope that quickly come full circle before questions. The hope is that by lifting the hood and showing you what's under the surface, that it repositions how you see something. And I guess as a parting thought, as you experience outdoor spaces, remember that there's usually a why to the what. In other words, what is it that is the driver for what you're looking at? There's a series of interests and decisions that culminated in what you see. So what you see is the surface. Ask yourself the question, what might have gone into this to make it what it is? So thank you.
I have a microphone that we can try to pass around. Questions?
I'll speak louder.
Okay, I think, yeah, maybe that we don't need it.
You literally, I used to jump off those rocks. Craig Poland.
Yeah.
So you brought back so many memories, because I went to a boys camp on that lake.
It's an amazing place. Yeah.
Your introduction for that specific one was how the humans interact with the land right there. I grew up
Yeah.
going to a camp right there.
Okay.
And the kids that literally jumped off those rocks that you were working on, that is fascinating.
Yeah, that is a magical spot there. We work on a number of great sites, but this was pretty
I
incredible.
really appreciate you bringing that project.
Absolutely.
But my question, in the very first one that you were presenting, the crane.
Estate, yes.
Yeah. I used to be in the building industry. There's as drawn and then reality as built. And you're looking at a project from early 1900s. Were you able to identify any differentiation between as drawn and what you were taking apart, meaning as built?
Yeah.
When you were doing the reconstruction.
Right. I mean, the drawings, we were able to get photographs, and then there was the real thing, the degraded real thing. So it's a little bit of a challenge. What are the drawings showing us? And there weren't construction drawings. In fact, when they demolished that back wall, they found bed frames in there for reinforcement. I mean, it was really, I did a little bit of research in regards to better understanding where concrete construction really came into its own. And when they built that, it was pretty on the forefront of that level of detailing that it was really remarkable. And so I think really we didn't have a lot of specific drawings to go by. We had the real thing that was left, lots of photographs and piecing it together. And then those mock-ups, I'm telling you, they were what the project was, because there were numerous mock-ups. We would do it and it would be, the aggregate was too white and it looked silly. It didn't look anything like the old thing. And then we had to also predict, what does weather? We're looking at something that was 1915 and something that was in a warehouse constructed maybe a couple of weeks ago, brought to the site. And so we had to interpret that. But yeah, not a lot of drawings to go by. And there's probably a couple misses, to be honest with you, because we were short some information. You couldn't measure something that was half eroded. You saw that picture of what the wall looked like when we approached it. So we inched along, and haven't been down there in a few minutes, but I think it's still standing. Thanks.
Thank you.
What got you interested in landscape architecture?
Wow, it's a great question. We ask people that in our interviews. Let's see, for me, I had the opportunity as a kid to travel with my mom to a lot of our national parks. We took a whole summer. I think I even got out of school for a couple months, and we traveled across the country. And as a little kid, I think what impressed me, maybe not knowing it then, was that there was a different way to develop, a different way to think about how you're connecting and relating to things that exist. And so rather than maybe dominating a site, really coming to understand a site and being inspired by it and responding to it. So I think it was some of those early sort of foundational experiences where I saw things that looked and felt different in some key places. And I'll admit that was a privileged opportunity. And then I think as I became interested in arts and drawing and painting and constructing and making, landscape architecture kind of hit me blindsided. And I said, hey, that kind of is the vortex of a lot of things that I'm interested in. And the neat part about it is, for me, is that was the beginning. And it's the very thing that still drives what I'm interested in today, is finding that way. I don't know how to say it, but is that helpful?
It is so reflective in that crazy hot tub.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have a question on Zoom. Carol Carter says, I know Maine is taking strides to preserve the night sky and reduce artificial light at night. Do you consider this and incorporate protections for the night sky, for wildlife, and views of the stars in your work?
Absolutely. We all should be doing that. There is a term called dark sky compliant. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's some standards for trying to be dark sky compliant. And I don't know if anyone ever rolls into Google Earth at night. It's actually showing you a picture of the planet, and the amount of light pollution is staggering, particularly the eastern seaboard. So I think the goal often with the office is to underlight and to treat lighting as a more of a minimal thing. It can be beautiful, but primarily functional. So I think we all have a responsibility as homeowners, as well as landscape architects and contractors, to be responsible for that. I think it starts with that thinking, and then dark sky compliant lighting plans.
I have a question. How long do you sit with the property for the course of the day before you start to really understand a little bit more of the creation? Because, 1 minute could be sunny and a blink of an eye, it can be in the shade.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's an important one in terms of getting it right. And, the more often you can visit the site to understand it, the better. The one thing I often think about is trying to look at the site with innocent eyes. I know this is getting a little heady, but anyway, if you're there with a big team of people, the owner's there, the client's there, everyone's talking, you're not really seeing the site. So I find it important to kind of essentialize what are the important things that define the site. And sometimes that's done by being at the site alone or with team members, so that we can talk about what's really there. And I think until you know what's there and what's important, it's too easy to lose sight of that as you start designing something, and then design overrides the very thing that makes it special. So I think spending some time there, getting to know it if you can, night and day, if you can, different seasons. But I think that's an important building block for doing something that's successful, that makes a connection with a place. And that's equally important with the community, getting to know the people that use a space too. I mean, there's the physical aspects of it, but then there's the social aspects of it too. And until you understand those, you don't know what you're connecting to. So I've always felt that, and it's never enough, to be honest with you, but trying to use time wisely to understand those qualities before you begin sets the groundwork for what you'll do.
The scale of those projects was staggering and awesome. Was there ever a moment when you were limited by time, resources, environment? In any of those, that were those not barriers you would have done something? Can you tell us about the way that you wish you'd done a little bit more, which is hard to imagine? And then conversely, I can't speak for everybody in this room, but I don't think any of us have properties quite that grand. Is there something that those of us with more modest sized yards and gardens could do? Just one thing we could do to make our landscapes look just like that. Yeah,
exactly. Well, let me start by saying I had a whole bunch of projects that I could have shown you, and I wanted to highlight those. And truth be told, the same ideas apply to the smallest garden as they do a big estate. I mean, I know that seems hard to believe, but it's absolutely true. And so, the office does small projects. We do day consultant projects where we go out and we help people immensely on a small project. We have one in Rockport right now that we'll spend a couple days talking to the client, being in the field, and then it's going to get built. So I want to diffuse the misnomer that the work that we presented is all the work that the office does. Absolutely not. We're very interested in public work, private work, nonprofit work, small work, as well as large work. I mean, we don't do it all, but we don't disregard a project necessarily because of that. So I wanted to say that. So I think the things that I've said could apply to any small garden. What was your other question?
If you had no limitations, what would you have done on any one of those projects to make it? What do you wish you could have done that you couldn't do because of limitations?
I'm going to answer that in an odd way, that the limitations are the very thing that drive a project in a way, right? Think about, a blank canvas is pretty scary, but if you have a client that's interested in something and a regulation that says you can't do this over here, or a cool grove or a big rock or something like that, they begin to start painting the painting. So you move into that and complete the painting. So I guess it's an odd question because I don't look at anything that we've done with regret. I look at it as, we bounced off of this wall to that wall. And at the end of the day, if you do that with intention, you know where you're going, you get there. So I don't think I could say this project needed something that's not there. I kind of ended by feeling whole about what we did do, not what we didn't do. So I'm sure if we talked after this meeting, I could come up with a few more, or a few, but good question. Thanks. Back to you.
Yes, I have a really hopeful you can shed some wisdom, because we live in such a diverse, you can be in the village, you can just be not even a mile out, and the deer will come and create such havoc, even if it's a new tree and they rut it, and I'm like, so then I'm protecting it, but then the protection takes away from the beauty. And so I've been really, as I'm getting older, the old me, just keep planting. And now I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I am my time, I want to do other things outside of being replanting or trying to figure out how to keep them at bay. Have you noticed, or do you have any wisdom on a way to really deter or think? Because even now I've bought things that they say are deer resistant, and it's not. And then I'm like, oh gosh, do I just give up? And I kind of hit this place of like going, okay, do I do more grass? Will they eat grass? What will they not like eat that will give dimension or make my garden unique to myself? Because we all, I think that's what he's trying to say, is each garden has to capture that person and we're all unique, but we can be challenged, especially in the country, of things that are out of our control.
Yeah,
with animals.
Certainly. I'm sure there's a few people in the room that are challenged by the deer. I've been surprised recently that we've done some plantings aware that deer exist. We use the deer proof list, where the deer like it, they hate it, whatever those lists are. And you plant the ones that they don't like, and then you come back and they get chewed by the deer because the winter is really rough or their population is so much or whatever it is. So I don't have a bulletproof way of approaching it, but I do think that if you look to what is native and what grows in the woods around you, which in combination could be quite beautiful, and I'll say as beautiful as an ornamental planting, you know, stretch a little bit for that one. But if they're not eating it in the woods near you, when you planted it at your house, they're probably not going to eat it there. So I think try to find native plants that you feel would be appropriate in combination in your garden, if that works. But you know, that's proof. If you walk next door and they're not eating it there, they're probably not going to eat it at your property. So some shortcomings with that, but there's more opportunity than most people realize with those native plants.
Maybe last one.
I'm curious about your the community engagement process, or say you're working with a family. Can you talk a little bit about what those questions and discussions look like when you go to the community and say, hey, we're going to build this thing? Do you just say, what do you think it should be, or how do you frame that?
Yeah, excellent question. There's not one way to do it. There's a lot of great ways to do it. I always carry this adage that great questions come from good, great answers come from good questions, or something like that, right? So I think you want to ask specific questions that are important so that you get information that really matters. I also think that working with communities and families, that trust is a really important part of it, that by working with them, when they trust you to really tell you what's on their mind, not just tell you something that's really on their mind, then you can get at what really matters to carry forward in the design. But I think it takes time, and I think you need to reflect to others that you really care about what they have to say. You're what's the difference between hearing and listening? You really want to listen so that you can come away with something that matters. The other thing I think is important for me is consensus doesn't mean, and this is more of a public setting, consensus doesn't mean everyone gets what they want, right? And so going into public work in particular, emphasizing the fact that, look, we're going to work together and no one in the room is going to get exactly what they want. That's not the way that it's going to work. But the process will educate people as to what's important and how you got to the place that you did. So if someone finds that something they wanted was compromised, at least they understand the process of what other people had to say and how that decision was arrived at. So fascinating part of the work. I mean, people use these landscapes, particularly the public ones, so that matters a whole lot.
Thank you so much.
All right, great. Thank you.